2 weeks into the season, the New York Mets have gotten off to a fast start, but there's still room for improvement. On today's show, I'm going to talk about what the best version of the New York Mets looks like in 2025.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. We are now 2 weeks into the season for the New York Mets. They have started off the year 8-4. They've won their last 3 series, taking 3 of the first 4 to start this season. And overall, they have played really good baseball. The pitching has been excellent. The hitting has been timely. And the Mets have found a way to win more than they've lost. But what I wanted to talk about today is where this team is going and how this team is going to evolve over the course of the year, because one thing that we know about a baseball season, your roster is going to take a lot of different shapes throughout the year. And I wanted to go back and compare this team to last year's team, one that did not get off to quite as good of a start, and just kind of compare what that team looked like and what this team has looked like. And I think the crazy thing to go back and just see is how much turnover the roster had last year. There was a transaction almost every single day. By the time you got to April 9th, 2024, Reed Garrett and Jose Butto, who did not start the year with the big league club, had come up and they were making impacts. Yohan Ramirez, Michael Tonkin were DFA'd. Tyler McGill hit the IL. Julio Teheran made a random start. Daniel Nunez came up for the first time, and he was up and down and up and down. Tyler J came up for the first time, and there was just so many names. Cole Sulser, just names in and out, in and out, in and out of that bullpen, because the bullpen was not effective. They were frequently having guys who were just burned, and they had to rotate arms just to have a healthy pen for any given game that they were going into. It was really a mess in a lot of ways. After April 9th, in the coming days and weeks, Francisco Alvarez would go on the IL. Tomas Nido came up. Brooks Raley went on the IL. JD Martinez came up. Zach Short was DFA'd. And that was the first time I'd seen the Mets really had a real change in identity when you finally got JD Martinez up playing every day at DH. And when Alvarez went down and you had to try to figure out how to stop the bleeding from a very serious injury to the roster, not serious in the sense that he was out for the year, but serious in the sense that you're losing a really key player. So all of a sudden it was Omar Narvaez and Tomas Nido. And again, we saw the bullpen be a revolving door. And early on for JD Martinez, he didn't just hit the ground running. And that first 2 months of the season, we all remember for the New York Mets, were a real slog. And they tried a lot of things. Early May, Christian Scott joins the team to make his debut. Middle of May, Mark Vientos comes back and ends up coming back for good. Joey Wendell gets released. Eventually, the Mets send Christian Scott down once David Peterson is back in the rotation to open up a spot in the bullpen for Daniel Nunez and to move to a traditional 5-man rotation, leading into that strength that the team had with Peterson, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, and then Tyler McGill was the main guy that was in that 5th spot. Luis Torrens was acquired in a trade. Jose Iglesias came up. And all of a sudden, the Mets really started to find their footing. June 11th, Francisco Alvarez is reinstated off the IL. Tomas Nido is DFA'd. And then that team really started to roll. And then it was just adding pieces throughout the year, plugging in a Phil Maton, trading for Ryan Stanek, Jesse Winker, Paul Blackburn, Huascar Brazaban. All these different moves that eventually coincided with a roster that was on fire from June on, and we all know what happened. So as we now pull it back to this season, what I find pretty remarkable is here we are, 12 games into the 2025 season, 10 days into April. The Mets have yet to make a single move to their active roster in 2 weeks. Their bullpen has stayed exactly the same. The only transactions you can find are minor league signings, 4 minor league signings the Mets have made, but that's it. Nothing that has impacted the roster the Mets had on opening day. And this team has performed fairly well, but there have been holes on this team. And the Mets do have reinforcements on the way. Francisco Alvarez played his first game in St. Lucie to rehab from that hamate bone, which is basically just taking that bone out of the hand. You got to make sure that it heals. Once it heals, you can ramp up pretty quickly. And now we're seeing that as Alvarez has beaten Jeff McNeil to rehab games. McNeil should not be too far behind. In his first game, Francisco Alvarez went 1 for 3 with a strikeout and a scorching double that was, or actually it wasn't a double, it was a base hit, scorching line drive. That was 108 miles per hour off the bat. So good to see Alvarez hit the ball hard. He caught 5 innings behind the plate. Imagine he might be 2 weeks away from coming back and rejoining the New York Mets, and Jeff McNeil could be on a similar timeline. So as we get to what is the best version of the 2025 New York Mets, it's having those guys part of this team. What will that look like? And once they are ingrained into this roster and this lineup, what else needs to be done for the New York Mets to be a team that can win the National League East and make a real run at winning the World Series this year? I want to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Just Ingredients. When it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients has also partnered with 2-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. With clean and transparent ingredients, Just Ingredients prioritizes wholesome, nourishing ingredients without the artificial junk. Whether you're recovering after a workout or need an energy boost, their grass-fed whey protein and pre-workout deliver real results. Visit justingredients.us/Bryce Harper and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off your order. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients on Instagram. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 13,000 subscribers. If you're liking the video, throw a like on it. And do me a favor, comment what you think would be the best version of the Mets this year when it comes to their starting lineup. Do they need to go out and make a trade to address their center field position? Is there a top prospect that can come up and make a big impact? Let me know what you think will be the best version of your 2025 New York Mets. Well, speaking of their best version of the Mets, they're about to get a lot better because Francisco Alvarez and Jeff McNeil are now soon to return as they both begin their process back with rehab assignments. McNeil, again, a couple days behind Francisco Alvarez, who already began his rehab, but I'd expect Jeff McNeil gets in there at some point at the end of this week, if not early next week, barring a setback. So that does give you 2 potential big bats that could rejoin this lineup. We know what's going to happen when Alvarez comes up. Luis Torrens is going to be his backup unless his health is still a question with that forearm. And Hayden Sanger is going to be sent to Syracuse. I think Sanger has done an amazing job. He has been great defensively, which we all expected. Amazing control in the running game. But the at-bats have been pretty good too. So I think the Mets now have a really good catching situation because they have a good third stringer that's going to sit on their 40-man roster and can be there for a couple of years. So that's been a really nice find for this team. Meanwhile, with Jeff McNeil, when he returns, that's going to be a big question. Is it going to be Acuna or Brett Beatty that goes down? Now, I did a live stream after Wednesday's game, and I spent an entire segment on Brett Beatty. So I don't want to repeat myself. You can go back and check that if you haven't already. I do think that Beatty's running out of opportunities. I will say that maybe playing in Sacramento in a minor league ballpark this weekend is going to help him get on track, and hopefully he does, because he probably has a week or two left here. I think the Mets will continue to feed him some opportunities. before McNeil comes up. And then if McNeil is ready to go and Beatty has not shown anything, I don't know how you send Acuna down over Beatty, even if Acuna needs the development in AAA more than Brett Beatty, where Brett Beatty is going to get much going on in AAA. He needs to prove that he can hit in the big leagues, but you can't just keep putting him out there if he's not a confident player. So again, I talked about that at length a little bit more on that live stream, but getting into what this lineup looks like with McNeil and Alvarez, imagine something like this: Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Mark Vientos, your DH spot, whether that's Jesse Winker or Starling Marte. Francisco Alvarez might hit 7th in this lineup. Jeff McNeil might bat 8th. And then you got Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, that center field position. That is a fantastic lineup that's super deep, especially if you're getting the best version of Alvarez and McNeil. And it's a lineup that doesn't have many questions. I think some of the questions are potentially looking at center field. Is that a position the Mets can upgrade at some point? Is Jeff McNeil really holding down second base? How is Mark Vientos progressing as the season goes on? And then you do wonder how your veteran DHs are going to hold up with Jesse Winker and Starling Marte, although not having to play the field should certainly keep them a little bit healthier and could still have them be a very productive platoon in that spot. I think this is a lineup that really doesn't need much. But the best version of the New York Mets, to me, either looks externally in center field or has a top prospect like Jett Williams who's ready to take over. And when it comes to the top prospects, I actually am planning to hopefully have Aram Layton, our prospect expert at Just Baseball, on with me. I'm recording an episode later today as you're listening to this that should go up on Friday. And we're going to talk about this very question: who is the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets? But the center fielder in 2025, it could be a guy that eventually becomes a center fielder of the future, whether that's a Jett Williams, a Nick Morabito, a Drew Gilbert. Those are all potential options. Drew Gilbert still isn't completely healthy yet, so we'll see what he looks like when he gets up to Syracuse. Morabito, I sort of doubt he would make that jump this year, but he is in Double-A, so he's worth mentioning in case he got super hot. But Jett Williams is the real spark plug X factor that could enter the fold here around the deadline. I would not be surprised if he does. Now, he's got a hit. So far, hasn't been a great start for him, but it's only been a couple games. If he starts to take off offensively and proves that he can play a good center field, I think that might be the best version of the New York Mets, unless they're going out and trying to swing a trade for a Luis Robert or any other center fielder that might be available. With Robert, though, the question is he going to be a quality hitter? And what's it going to take to get him? How many blue chippers do you have to give up for a guy that's been wildly inconsistent throughout his career and pretty injury prone? So I'd have my hesitation for sure about the Mets acquiring him. That's where I still think the best version of this team might all be internal, with Jett Williams being the hope in center field. And then at second base, I think at this stage, I still feel the best about Jeff McNeil just because he's a veteran that has done it before, but you still have a lot of options. Setting Brett Beatty aside, if you send Luis Angel Acuna down at some point, get him some run, maybe he starts to hit a little bit better and he ends up being the guy. Maybe staying up on the big league roster and platooning with Jeff McNeil, he finds his footing that way and starts to eat into McNeil's playing time. I think that is a definite option. And then you still have Ronnie Mauricio as another wild card that could enter the fray. So I think the Mets, when they get Alvarez and McNeil back, they're going to be very close to the best version of this team offensively this season. I don't view this team as one that has to go out and swing a big move to get a huge bat at the deadline. I think that if they get some internal development, they could plug holes at center field and second base, assuming that the guys they have, the veterans, McNeil, Siri, Taylor, don't just have great seasons and hold on to those spots. I think there is room within this organization to have guys fill into those places. But the first couple tastes of young players getting opportunities has not, looked quite as promising as you would have hoped. That doesn't mean that what Acuna and Beatty look like in April is what they're going to look like in July and August, or what Ronnie Mauricio could potentially look like at that point in time. Same thing with Jett Williams. But I definitely think that when you get Alvarez and McNeil back, this team is at full strength now, and I don't think you need to get that much better for this to be a roster that can win it all this year. I really think the lineup is that good, even though we haven't seen them completely show it yet. On the other side of things, though, the pitching has been probably better than we can expect moving forward. I don't know if you can anticipate and count on the Mets to have the best staff in all of baseball, but it has been a great start, and it does give us a little bit of insight on what the strength is of this team and how they can continue to get stronger internally and maybe externally throughout the season to plug any holes and have a pitching staff that can go up and rival the likes of the Dodgers, the Padres, the other best teams in the National League. I want to talk about the pitching and what would be the best version of the staff in 2025 in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action right now. When you join FanDuel and you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com to claim your $250 bonus. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, what is the best version of the Mets pitching staff this year? It's hard to get better than what we've seen so far. Remarkable pitching out of the bullpen by the New York Mets. You've seen the starting pitchers not get deep into games, but be effective in their 4 to 5 inning spurts. It has worked for this team, but there are still reinforcements coming. You have Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas, who might be able to rejoin the rotation in June. The first guy that could be back is Paul Blackburn, who's dealing with that knee inflammation. The hope is that'll all calm down. And as soon as those 15 days on the IL are up, actually maybe a little bit after that, he could rejoin the rotation on April 18th and potentially make it a 6-man rotation. But I'm a little bit conflicted on that plan. I understand that you need to give Kodai Senga that extra rest. I understand that it's maybe important to have Clay Holmes get the extra rest, and extra rest wouldn't necessarily hurt a David Peterson, a Tyler McGill, a Griffin Canning, because those guys could be fresher for the long run. But last year, the best version of the Mets was when they got to a 5-man rotation. Now, part of that was because it allowed them to continue to play the mix and match game with their bullpen and add arms in and out when they needed to. But also it's because they didn't have a dead spot on the roster where you have a 6-man rotation, so you have one less man in the bullpen. That's the one downside to the 6-man rotation. And when I look at the strength of this Mets team, I'm starting to believe that the strength is having a great bullpen. Because if Huáscar Brazoban, Jose Budo, and Max Kranick continue what they've done, and you can add Daniel Nunez as another multi-inning weapon to the fold, and you have 4 guys in that bullpen that can give you 30 pitches every 2 or 3 days, all of a sudden you're looking at a group that has a lot of flexibility to it, and also a group that might be prepared pretty well to throw the occasional bullpen game to avoid having to put 6 starters in the rotation at all times. That's why I think the best version of the Mets is probably still an 8-man bullpen, where you have those 4 guys who are multi-inning specialists, Brazoban, Kranick, Daniel Nunez, and Jose Budo. And then you have your setup men, your high leverage guys, AJ Minter, Ryan Stanek, Reed Garrett, and your closer Edwin Diaz. I feel like that is the best version of the New York Mets, when you have all 8 of those arms going. By the time the Mets get to the playoffs, I would hope that all 8 of those arms are in the fold. And obviously things happen. Guys are going to go down. Maybe you do make a move at the deadline for another reliever because, something happens and you need another high leverage arm. But the Mets are sitting in such a good spot with where they have opened the season with that bullpen and still having potentially their best reliever in Daniel Nunez waiting in the wings, kind of slow playing his ramp up to eventually enter the fold at some point and be an impact arm. So if the Mets go with an 8-man bullpen still and they have to try to find their 5 starters, the question then is, who are they? Because you have 8 guys vying for 6 spots or 5 spots, depending on what you decide to do. I think Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, and David Peterson, barring health, are the 3 best starting pitchers on this team right now. Now, Clay Holmes has flashed. Tyler McGill has flashed some good stuff so far. Even Griffin Canning has. Blackburn and Montas, just like Manaea, have been hurt. Do the Mets need to go out and add a starting pitcher? I really don't know the answer to that. In some respects, sure, because you need guys that can start playoff games. But what happens if Tyler or McGill continues to be awesome this year? What happens if Clay Holmes figures it out? What happens if Frankie Montas comes back in June and has a fresh arm and looks really good? That is one thing about having Manaea and Montas on the IL. If they can come back and be healthy upon their return and not have any more setbacks with these injuries, these guys might be fresher come October. And they could be guys that start playoff games because they've done that in the past. And last year, did that to some success. I can't remember how well Frankie Montas was, or how well Frankie Montas did in the game against the Mets. I know he pitched well in the final regular season game, and I feel like he got a playoff start. Let me check this out. But looking at those options, the Mets have so many different, potential guys they could, throw out there. But do they have the frontline arms? And yes, he did pitch October 2nd against the Mets, 3 2/3, 3 runs allowed. Only one of them was earned. What was that game? That game 2? That was the game that the Brewers won, game 2. There you go. But looking at this rotation, I still think that the best version of it is going to have Senga, Manaea, and Peterson. I wouldn't be surprised if it had Montas and McGill, honestly, just because I think Montas, when he comes back, he does have really good stuff. McGill, I feel pretty confident in. And then I don't really know about Clay Holmes. Like, I think he is going to be good early on. I just don't know at the end of the season how it looks. And then the question is, do you go out and you get an ace? If we were just to put the dream team together, New York Mets are going to the playoffs with this roster. To me, the team is starting lineup: Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Mark Vientos, Jesse Winker, Starling Marte platoon, Francisco Alvarez, Jeff McNeil, Jett Williams in center field. I think that's the best version of the New York Mets in 2025. When it comes to their bullpen, I already laid it out. Having Brazaban, Budo, Kranick, and Nunez as your multi-inning guys, having Garrett, Minter, Stanek as setup men, having Edwin Diaz as your closer. And then for your rotation, I'd say Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea. Actually, we'll go Sandy Alcantara, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, David Peterson. And then I don't even care who the 5th is. Call it Montas, call it McGill, call it Clay Holmes, call it Griffin Canning. Does not matter. That would be the best version of the 2025 New York Mets. Can they pull off a trade to get Sandy? We'll find out as this season progresses. We'll see where Sandy ends up falling. And there could be other, really good starting pitchers that are available where you might not need to get a guy in division. There might be somebody out there that you can poach that comes from the American League that you might not have to give up as much to get, who can still be an impact pitcher. But the Mets are in a great spot through 12 games. I think version 2.0 of the Mets that's going to plug in Alvarez and McNeil is going to be a little bit better. Eventually, they can plug in Montas and Manaea. They can get better. They might have top prospects that develop that can get into this equation, whether it's Jett Williams or a top pitching prospect in Brandon Sproat, that can make them better. And this is a team that can always add the trade deadline. But the New York Mets right now, if you're looking at the problems on this roster that eventually need to be addressed, center field and second base are the two glaring holes so far. And then there's still the ever-pressing question of, do the Mets have enough frontline pitching come October? But this team, compared to the one last year that was turning over the roster every single day, is in a much better spot to sustain what they've done here and continue to be a winning team atop the National League East. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow's show, again, I'm hoping to have Arm Layton on so we could talk a little bit of prospects. We'll dive into who the center fielder of the future is for the New York Mets. We'll talk about the top arms in this system, what Matt Allen looked like from a scout's perspective in his first start back since 2019. Who's going to be, the best of the bunch from all these different infielders the Mets have. So we'll have a lot of really fun topics on the top prospects in the Mets system. And then for your series preview, I am going to be going on Locked On A's. So you can get a full series preview there. I might still put it, I guess, on my podcast feed as well so you can find it easily. But I'm going to be a guest on Locked On A's for a crossover. And so that way you'll have two different episodes. One to talk about the future of the New York Mets with some prospect stuff. Another, if you want to just get yourself ready for a weekend series, Mets versus A's. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.